Hello everybody, thanks so much for joining us to this final Galloway Footsteps event, which for those of us, there's some very familiar faces in the audience, lovely to see everybody. So for those of you who've been coming along before, you know that this is the fourth of our series of Galloway Footsteps events, all designed at showing you what individual actions you can take that will add up to make a bigger impact. And we wanted to inform you, and we wanted to give some real concrete ideas as for how things could be done differently and individual actions we can all take. So this one is going to be a bit different because it's the final one. So we have got some excellent speakers here, as you know. I'm going to introduce them in a minute. But we're taking the chance to think a bit wider and think about the other people who are working towards the climate emergency, as well as just our individual actions. And also we're thinking about the legacy of this scheme and how we can go on a bit further. So I'd like to introduce, if I can, our speakers. And if you guys, it depends how hard I've got you locked down on security, but you might be able to unmute and say hello so that you come up for people. But so we've got Nikki Hume from the Borders Forest Trust. Nikki works as a woodland advisor at Borders Forest Trust, providing free support for private landowners who want to plant native woodlands or protect ancient woodlands in the Scottish borders. The Borders Forest Trust also have some of their own woodlands, and they're carrying out large-scale ecological restoration projects, from tree planting to peat bog restoration. And alongside of that, they run a range of activities for adults and children to help local people learn about woodlands and engage with nature. And it sounds like the sort of thing that Dumfries and Galloway could do with, but Borders have got it, and we're looking forward to hearing from Nikki about successful tree planting. We've got Councillor Dougie Campbell over there. If I meet your co-host, you'll be able to say hello. A lot of you will know Dougie. He represents the Dee and Glen Kens ward and is the council's environment champion. He's also the chair of the Climate Emergency Cross-Party Working Group, which is responsible for overseeing implementation of the council's 12-point plan. So he's going to be talking to us a little bit about what the council's priorities for net zero by 2025 are, and how we can all work together to try and achieve that. And then lastly, we've got Ted Leeming. Ted is a Cornish boy, which I didn't know, who moved to Scotland in 1996 to start Natural Power Consultants, the renewable energy firm up here in the Glen Kens, and never gone back. Ted's been involved in renewables since 1990, and he remains there as an industry advisor and a non-executive director of Natural Power Consultants. And he's now a professional landscape photographer, focusing on issues surrounding climate change. I should say he's also the chair of the Galloway Glen scheme, which is very much appreciated. And he lives 4 miles north of Dalry in the Glen Kens, so very, very local in the Galloway Glens area. So those are the speakers for today. I just wanted to give you, and I think I'm looking at the names. I think a lot of people have seen this, so we'll go quite quickly through Geeky. Oh, here we've got the agenda. We'll have a quick overview of Geeky. As I said, tree planting with Nikki, net zero by 2025 with Dougie, personal reflections on climate change by Ted Leeming. That's something a bit different. It's really going to be really good. And then I've got a final update on Team Galloway for you, and the next steps. And we'll be all done by 9 o'clock, I'm quite sure. So Geeky Zero, we partnered with Geeky because we identified very early on in this sort of initiative that we wanted to be really able to really understand what we wanted to be able to measure the impact of our actions, as well as just be fairly sure that everything we were doing was a good thing. We wanted to make sure that we could really have a baseline and then see how we were all getting on, both as individuals and as teams. So we started up Team Galloway through Geeky, who've been a fantastic partner to us. And those of you who've been on Geeky will know that it's a very, very engaging way of first of all, assessing and then improving your carbon footprint. Geeky is a social enterprise. It's a not-for-profit company that offers the, as we say, step-by-step guide to reducing your carbon footprints. And it really is personalized and it really is fun. It kind of gamifies it when you set up, as we'll see here. Now, I'm not going to focus on this because I know Ted's slides are covering some of these, but just to emphasize, this is the carbon emissions since 1850. And although it is cyclical through time, it's never done this before. So, you know, here we are today, and this really does have to be the decade for action. And we all need to bring our carbon footprints down to something that the planet can sustain. I'll just pop over to here. Oh, it's logged me out. Sorry. I just wanted to show you how engaging it is for those of you who haven't seen it. See how the new Galloway electrons are doing. Here we go. So it's telling me my score. The higher the better for Geeky. You sign up. You can sign up through me. Just email me on helen.karen@domgal.gov.uk, and it's never too late to do that, I should say. And then you join in. You can do it as an individual, or you can join Team Galloway. And you first of all assess your individual baseline, and then they suggest all these little ideas that you can do. Try a local bike share scheme, swap any trip for a bike ride, pack a healthy snack, and you can either say that you do it or you can commit to do it, and then it nudges you all the way through as you just take these little steps that really do all add up to getting us all to a place where we need to be. So it's been really, I found it ever so useful, and at the end of it I've got some reflections on what I've learned from it. But I don't want to go into it too much because I think it's time to hand over to Nikki.
That's great. Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Nikki and I work at Borders Forest Trust, and I'm just going to do a little brief introduction about how to grow trees successfully. To help you out with that, it's one of the things we can all do to help absorb a bit of carbon dioxide. So it ties in really nice to what you're all doing, working at your own carbon footprints and trying to reduce them. So I wanted to start with just, well, why bother in the first place? Why plant trees? And I've touched on the carbon already. And on average in the UK, 4 trees will absorb about a ton of carbon. So it's really quite significant. You know, we think on average people are sort of producing around 6 to 10 tons of CO2 per year. And you'll all have a better idea of that if you've been using Geeky. It's probably given you your own personal figure. So if you think that 4 trees can absorb a ton, that really can go quite a long way to offsetting your annual carbon output. So it's a really good way to absorb carbon and help tackle climate change. But there's lots of other benefits too, from helping biodiversity, natural flood management, shelter for livestock, loads of different things. So there's not really an excuse not to. We should all be doing it if you've got a little bit of space, and if you don't have your own space, then it's a case of pestering your local council, seeing if they can let you do it, maybe a local school, maybe a local farmer. There's always space for a tree somewhere. So you want to plant a tree. Let's say you've decided to plant a tree in your garden or in the local primary school or something. How are you going to start? Where do you actually get a tree? And there's a few different options. One of the cheapest and easiest ways to do it is to buy what's called cell-grown trees. And those are sold usually in sort of quite big quantities. So you can buy them in packs of 10 or 15. And the more you buy, the cheaper they are. So you'll see I've put the price there, ranges from 50p to £2. And that's all to do with kind of what quantities you buy. They come with a little kind of cell of soil around the bottom. They're usually about 40 centimetres tall. They're really easy to plant and they're a great option. And there's lots of nurseries in Scotland and the north of England that you can buy them from. The next thing are container grown trees. And this is what people who haven't planted trees before are often attracted to because they're bigger. They might be 1 to 2 meters tall, and you might be able to pick them up in your local garden centre or from a tree nursery. But don't get drawn to them too easily because they're not always the best option. They're much more expensive. You'll see they'll cost you between 20 and 60 pounds, depending on what size you go for. And they actually have a really high failure rate compared to the small cell-grown trees. And that's because they've spent the first 5-10 years of their life in a nice tree nursery getting fertilizer, it's sheltered, it's sunny, and you move them onto a windy hillside and it can be a bit of a shock and they'll often die. They've got a tiny area of roots compared to the size of the tree, which is quite unnatural. A lot of watering in the first few years. So I'd say only plant those if it's going to be something you can water, you know, weekly when you first put it in. And that you really can maintain and be prepared for it, not necessarily to survive. So they can be a bit of a false, a kind of false economy in a way. Yeah, bigger doesn't always mean better with tree planting. And then the last option, which may be the best for lots of people here, if you're thinking of just planting 1 or 2 trees in your garden, is just to grow them yourself. It's totally free. find a local native tree near you. Oak is one of the easiest, so that's some acorns in that photo. You collect acorns in the autumn and you just pop them in pots, and that's it. Put them in some pots in your garden. Not all of them will grow, so plant a lot more than you actually want to have. And if you end up with a few extra, give them to a friend. But you literally just put them in a little pot with some soil, a little bit of compost if you want to. Keep them away from rabbits and things like that, so keep them raised up maybe. And that's it, and grow them in a pot until they're a little bit bigger, and then I'll tell you about the next stage after that. So that's certainly the cheapest way of doing it, and it's really satisfying. Kids love it. Other species that are really easy to grow from seed are hazel, apple, these sorts of things. Ones that have fruit around them, like rowan berries or cherries, can be a little bit harder. You need to sort of take the fruit off first. But I've put a link there to a really good guide for growing trees from seeds. And I think that these slides are maybe going to be shared afterwards. So use all of those links if you'd like to learn more about growing trees from seed. So how do you plant a tree? Let's say you've bought one or you've grown one yourself in a little pot. What next? Well, first of all, what time of year do you want to do it? You want to do it when the trees are dormant. So that's when the leaves are off. That's when they're not doing so much. So it's less stressful to plant the tree and it's much more likely to survive. So you'll have to excuse my photos here, which were taken last week. So the tree does have its leaves on. So don't follow my example with the time of year. So the first step is to prepare your sapling. And this is a cell-grown one, like I've described, but you might have more soil around the bottom of your tree if it's come in a pot or if you've grown it in a pot. That's fine. It's the same process for all of them. So before you do anything, you want to make sure that your tree is nice and wet. You can soak it in water for a few hours before you even start. Make sure you take the container off it, and then just gently loosen the roots. Tease out some of the roots if you can, just to help them spread out and grow once they're in the soil. Be careful not to break them, but just gently loosen them. Next, you want to clear some of the vegetation where you're going to plant. So it might be that you've got grass, it might be in your garden, and you want to clear some vegetation so that there's not too much competition for the young tree. So here I've just done what's called screefing, which is where you literally swing your spade at the ground and clear away a patch of soil. You're just trying to break the grass roots so that it doesn't come back too quickly. If you've got short mown grass, you can just cut a square of turf with your spade and turn that upside down. That works really well too. So yeah, that's the first step. The next thing is to dig your hole. Now, people think they're going to be doing lots of digging when it comes to tree planting, but the reality is that if you're buying small trees, you need very small holes. So you don't need to dig a big deep hole, just a small hole. You just want the tree to fit in that quite neatly. And there's no need for any special spades or anything. You may have seen commercial tree planters with special narrow planting spades. You can get one of those if you're going to be doing a lot of planting, but if you're just planting a small number, use a garden spade. Even a trowel works absolutely fine. See if you can borrow one. You don't need any specialist equipment. Next, you want to put your tree in the hole. So this is the cell-grown tree that I'm putting in here. And this piece of wood is just to demonstrate that you want the level of soil that's already on the tree to be the same as the ground level. You really don't want to put that in too deep, and you don't want to have the soil on the tree sticking out of the ground at all. You just want that all to be level. If there's any kind of trailing roots on your tree, you want to make sure those are all pointing down. If any of those are sort of pointing upwards when you put it in the hole, they'll grow upwards and reach the ground and then stop. They'll reach the surface and stop growing. So you want to make sure all the roots are neatly pointing down. Then you fill the soil back in around your tree. And as I said, it should just all be level, with the ground level should be the same as it is on the tree. And then you just firm that soil in a little bit with your foot. You're not trying to compact the soil too much, but you are trying to get rid of any air pockets around the roots, because if the roots hit air, they'll stop growing. So you're just trying to gently firm that soil in with your feet. And then if you've got a fairly small tree like this one, there's absolutely no need to attach the tree to a stake, but you do need to put a wooden stake in to attach some sort of protection to. So that's something that a lot of people do unnecessarily, is attach the tree itself onto a stake. You only need to do that if you're planting a very big tree, and that's because they've got that really small root ball, so they're not stable in the ground at all. So they need to be strapped onto a stake to give them a bit of support at first. And you can use something soft like an old inner tube from a bike to do that. or an old pair of tights, that works well. Again, you don't need to buy anything special, just something soft and flexible. But in this case, the tree doesn't need to be held up. It's small, and it's much better that it grows its roots to support itself and doesn't have any additional support. So I'm putting this stake in just to attach a tree tube to. And I've put this stake in using a mallet, and I have got it in really quite far into the ground. You want to be able to kind of ping the stake with your finger, and it should bounce back into position. It shouldn't tilt over when you do that. You have to think of the strong wind that's going to hit it in the winter and make sure that's in really well. And you want that stake to be quite close to the tree without damaging the roots, because you're going to attach a tube onto that, as we'll see next. So yeah, the next thing to do is put some sort of protection on your tree. And that's to keep things like voles, rabbits, hares, deer from eating your young tree. And we're going to come on to different options for that later. But the most basic option is to use one of these tree tubes. And there's so many of them around. You may actually be able to get your hands on some second-hand ones. Borders Forest Trust certainly have some second-hand ones. One of our sites near Moffat, which anyone local to there is welcome to have some of for free. And with these tubes, you'll see in the first picture, I'll just get my pointer here. Yeah, in this first picture here, what I'm doing is just guiding the branches of the tree up into the tube so that they don't get crushed or damaged by the tube as I lower it on. And then in the second picture, you'll see that I've got that tube really actually pushed very slightly into the ground, about 1 centimetre into the soil. And that's to stop things like voles getting up under it, and also to stop it rattling about in the wind. So that's a really important stage. It's kind of a waste of time to put a tree tube on if you don't push it into the ground very slightly. You don't want to push it in any deeper than 1 centimetre because you can stop the roots from growing, but just a little bit is perfect. And then in this picture, that's it all in place. There's a cable tie that you need to pull that really tight to hold everything in place. So that's that tree protected. And this height of tube will keep rabbits and voles off. So that's the sort of thing you might have in your garden. So that would be perfect for a garden setting. Next, you want to do something to keep the other vegetation, any competing vegetation, suppressed for the first couple of years. And the best way of doing that is using a natural mulch. So something like wood chip or old straw, some like old animal bedding from a horse's stable, something like that, even grass clippings, anything that you can lay down on the ground in a kind of, that's quite a small area that I've done in that image. If you can do kind of 0.5 metre to 1 metre radius of mulch, and that just helps to keep any other vegetation down so there's less competition for the tree. You don't want it to be any deeper than 3 inches. If you pile it too high, you'll actually suffocate the tree. So just a shallow layer of mulch, and try to use something natural if you can. Sometimes people use like black plastic, but it's so easy to forget about it, and it can get kind of caught up in the vegetation and stay there forever. So much better to use something natural if you've got it to hand. And then that's it really. You need to just remember to maintain your tree. So at least once a year, come back and check the tube. It might have got some long grass growing in it. So you want to take that out to stop it choking the tree. Those cable ties that come on plastic tubes are releasable. So it's really easy to open them and lift the tube off temporarily to take out any grass. If the tube gets sort of blown a little bit squint in strong wind or knocked over by someone, straighten it up. Maybe reapply some mulch every year just for the first 2 or 3 years. So these sorts of things can make a really big difference to the success of your tree. So many people plant a tree and then leave it, and it can really get sort of choked by weeds and things. And it's such a shame because just a little maintenance twice a year can make all the difference. So I mentioned tree tubes there, and they're obviously everyone here on this call is interested in doing good for the environment, and putting a piece of plastic around a tree can feel a little bit goes against what you're trying to achieve. You know, we're all trying to cut down on single-use plastic, and it's been a big problem in the forestry world. It's this thing that if we don't use guards for our trees, they do get eaten by deer and rabbits, and so we don't get trees. But they tend to have been made of plastic until now. There's loads of different options coming out for biodegradable tree guards. So I've put some of them here, and again, you'll get these slides so you can follow any of these links. We've been trialing several of these, and we've had mixed results so far. Some of them have been developed in the south of England, where it's a lot drier, and we found some of them have biodegraded far too quickly in a wet Scottish winter. But we've fed back to them, and lots of them are actually coming out with new improved models this winter or next year. So I'd say, have a look at their websites, give them a go. And also, if you're just planting, 2 trees in your garden, it's not a huge risk. So you can get a couple. And if you have to replace them after a couple of years, it's not the end of the world. They're not very expensive. There's ones here made of cardboard. This one's made of cornstarch. This one's made of coconut husks. This is a really interesting one made of wool. So they're making use of wool that can't be sold from the British Wool Board. But best of all, if you're doing it on a really small scale, just make something yourself. This one's made of old milk bottles. Get a couple of plastic bottles, make some slots in them and put a bamboo cane through them. It doesn't need to be anything fancy. I've seen people use Tetra Packs and things like that. So if you're just planting a few trees, make something yourself, or see if you can get your hands on some secondhand tree tubes. So what are the biggest mistakes people make with tree planting that can make or break the success for the tree? The first one is inappropriate location. So this is one of the biggest mistakes people make, especially when it comes to planting in gardens. I've seen people plant monkey puzzle trees in small urban gardens, and these are one of the tallest trees in the world. It's not appropriate in that setting, and chances are in 10, 20 years' time, someone's going to have to spend a lot of money having a tree surgeon come to cut that tree down. And it's a total waste of money, and it's a shame because that tree could have been planted in a different location where it could have grown to its full potential, or a smaller, more appropriate tree could have been planted. So if you've got a small garden, something like a rowan or a fruit tree is a really good option. They're quite small, with the added bonus of getting something you can eat from them. So apple trees, cherry trees, plum trees are all great options. If you've got a bigger garden, something like an oak tree or an alder or a silver birch, they're all really nice options too, but they need a bit more space. You don't want to be worrying on a windy night that a tree is going to fall on your house. And equally, there's scenarios outside of garden environments that can be inappropriate for trees to be planted in. Some examples are deep peat. So there is a lot of deep peat in Dumfries and Galloway. And it's actually a much better carbon store than trees themselves are. So it's better left alone. By planting trees on it, we dry it out and release more carbon than the trees can absorb. So it's best left as it is. Other sensitive habitats, like if you've got a stunning wildflower meadow full of diversity, again, it's best left alone. If you plant trees there, they'll shade out the wildflowers. And that would be a shame for all of the insects that will benefit from that wildflower meadow. So there's certain places that are best left without trees. And then it's a case of picking the right trees for the wetness of the site. So if it's a very wet site, things like willow and alder are great, whereas beech would hate it. So it's doing a bit of research before you decide which trees to plant. The next mistake people make is incorrectly planting their tree. So it's just a really simple one, and I've mentioned it already. You want the level of the soil on the tree to match the ground level. If you plant it too shallow, the roots will die, and if you plant it too deep, the trunk will start to rot. So that's one that you can easily get right at the start. This is one that most people don't notice, and this is a photo of it actually done correctly. But you'll see here, this is the inside of a tree tube, and this is the cable tie that attaches the tree tube to the stake. It's really easy when you stick a tree tube on to catch the tree inside this loop of the cable tie. And then when you pull the cable tie tight, you can snap your tree, which is a real shame if you've gone to all the effort of getting a tree and a tube and a stake. So just when you're putting your tree tube on, be careful that you haven't caught your tree inside this loop here. Another big mistake people make is thinking that they can get away without any protection for their tree. So on the left here, this is a tree that's been grown without any protection, and that shows the damage that voles can do. They're like little mini beavers that you don't often see, but they love young trees. Once the tree's 5 or 6 years old, the bark's much tougher and the voles don't bother with it. But when they're really young, the voles will go for it, especially in the winter. And on the right here, this tree does have a guard on it, but it's too short. It's a 60-centimeter guard in an area where there's lots of deer. And you'll see that this tree has just been nibbled year after year. So it's got multiple branches, but it's not gaining any height. So in that case, that tree should have had a taller 1.2-meter guard on it. So think about where you're planting your trees and what sort of wildlife there is, and that'll help you choose what type of tree tube to use. next mistake people make is just leaving the tubes on for far too long. So as soon as your tree is getting about as thick as the tube, you want to take it off really quickly. You'll see here, this one's been left on and it's got so full of moss that it just means water is getting trapped around the tree, and that can lead to rot. So that tube should come off. This tube here is starting to constrict the branches and it'll start to rub on the tree and cause damage. This one here on a juniper should probably never have been used on a juniper in the first place, but it's been left on for such a long time that the juniper's got really top heavy. And now if that tube is taken off, the plant will probably fall over. So if that had been taken off sooner, that problem wouldn't have happened. And on this picture on the right, you can see this is actually this tree here. Once the tube's been taken off, you can see how wet and mossy and kind of rotten it is in there. So yeah, take the tubes off. And once you've taken them off, make sure that you take them to the recycling centre. Don't leave them lying around. This was a river clean that was organised all along the Tweed in 2020. And at every single location along the Tweed, tree tubes were one of the biggest items in volume that they were finding there. So you'll see all these bags at the front are full of tree tubes, and that's just where they've been left lying around, especially in riverside planting sites, and they end up in the river when the river floods, and they're a huge pollution problem. So yeah, it's really important to take them off when they're not needed anymore and recycle them. That won't be a problem so much once we're all using the biodegradable ones though, so that's great. And lastly, just enjoy it, you know, look forward to having some trees in your garden or somewhere nearby that you can walk in and watch the wildlife in. People think that, oh, you know, I'll plant a tree and I'll never get to enjoy it in my lifetime, but that's really not true. You know, even 5-6 years time, you're going to have something that's starting to be the same height as you, if not taller, and you'll be amazed how quickly wildlife moves in. You'll notice it with insects first, and then birds very quickly move into young woodlands. So yeah, it's a really rewarding thing to do. So I hope everyone gets the chance to do it, whether it's in their own garden, and if not, then Borders Forest Trust have volunteering opportunities. You can come along and plant a tree with us if you haven't got your own space to do so. So yeah, that's it for me, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Oh, thanks very much, Nikki. That was fascinating. And I have to say, speaking for myself, you answered each question as they popped in my mind. So really comprehensive, but learned a lot about that. Really interesting that the container grown trees have a lower survival rate. I don't think they tell you that in the nursery, do they? So that's a top tip. We have got a question from McNabb here. Are there any particular species that we should be trying to plant in southern Scotland? Things we need or things that do well?
Yeah, well, we're lucky that it's slightly kind of milder and less extreme than some places further north in Scotland. So you've got a huge choice in terms of native trees. One of the hardiest ones that you can't really go wrong with is birch, silver birch or downy birch. Probably the further west you are, downy birch is more appropriate. And it's just a really great tree that is almost always going to do well in a whole range of conditions. But also oak, hazel, rowan, alder, willow. Willow's a great one for bees because its flowers come out really early. It's one of the first sources of pollen for bees. So that's always a great one. Really, any native tree species is a great one to plant. Unfortunately, we've got diseases like ash dieback. So just having the most diversity of trees that we can is really important, because it means that if we do get a disease, it doesn't sort of wipe the
Yeah, brilliant. My brother planted loads of acorns when he was a toddler, and he is 42 now, and they are, what you were saying about a tree in your lifetime, they are big, beautiful trees now. You wouldn't believe it. Yeah. My mum wasn't too chuffed when she found them all over the garden, but they got relocated. Leslie, a key supporter of this scheme, thank you, Leslie, says, if you've staked a tree, how long would you leave the stake in for, typically? You mentioned that biodegradable tubes come off when they're wide enough, but what about staking?
That's a good question. And it's really, you know, I wouldn't want to leave it on for more than sort of 3 years or so. The only point of the stake is to support the tree while its roots spread out. So in the nursery, they kind of keep the roots in a very manageable size so that they can be transported, but it's not, it doesn't give the tree much stability. So the stake is just there to help the tree establish its roots. But really you want to take that off as soon as possible to let the tree start sort of looking after itself. You don't want it to be reliant on that stake. And one of the things I see so often is stakes left on too long and the band, the sort of strap, cutting into the tree and strangling it. So Yeah, I'd say 3 or 4 years, and you could think of taking that off.
Yeah, and Leslie, then should you feed a tree, or again, are you trying to leave them to acclimatise?
I think that what's more important is watering them in the first year, especially if you plant them in, say, like towards the end of spring in April or May. We can often get really dry weather then. So you want to make sure they're getting plenty of water at that point. With native trees, they're really well adapted to our soil conditions and they shouldn't need any additional fertilizer or feed.
Okay, fascinating stuff. And then I think a last question from Ted. Does climate change mean we should be looking to plant different species, either that'll help us adapt or that are better suited for changing climates?
That's a really interesting question that I don't have a definite answer to. I think the best answer I can give is just plant a diversity, and it's up to you in your garden whether you go for native or non-native. If you're doing something on a wider scale, you have to go through kind of application process with Scottish Forestry, and that'll help determine what species to plant. But I think the key is just to plant a diversity of species, and our native species are very adaptable. You know, for example, Scots pine has a huge range across the Northern Hemisphere. It's not confined just to Scotland. The same with lots of our tree species are, you know, they're really adaptable to different climates. And I think the most important thing is just to plant trees and try not to worry too much about trying to second guess which are going to cope with climate change and which aren't. The best thing we can do is to have plenty of them. Yeah.
Just do something. Yeah, fabulous. Well, that was great, Nikki. Thank you so much. Really appreciated that. Some really practical tips there that makes me want to get my spade out straight away. So that's fabulous. I don't know if you're going to hang around, but I'm gonna, if you wouldn't mind stopping sharing your screen, I'll hand over now to Dougie Campbell, the climate champion for Dumfries and Galloway Council. And Doug is going to speak to us for a little bit about the council's plans for net zero by 2025 and what we all need to do to support the council in their efforts to reaching that target. So I've asked you to unmute, Dougie. Can you see that?
Okay, lovely. It's an absolute pleasure to be here tonight, and thank you very much for inviting me. It was interesting just listening to Nikki's presentation. I get an awful lot of inquiries about people and groups who want to plant trees, and I think if Nikki is agreeable, I'll be passing her contact details on, because I fear that a lot of the trees that are being planted won't survive very long if they're not been done in an appropriate manner. So what I'd like to do, folks, over the next few minutes is take you on a whistle-stop tour on what Dumfries and Galloway Council has been doing over the last 18 months on climate change, set in the context of what is happening both nationally and locally. As we all know, during the spring and summer of 2019, people across the globe, including here in our region, began to demand that governments take urgent action on climate change. The Scottish Government, along with many other national governments, declared a climate emergency and set a target of 2045 for Scotland to be carbon and greenhouse gas neutral. In consideration of what action Dumfries and Galloway Council should take, I was mindful that we shouldn't just make a mere token gesture, but rather we had to make a clear and unequivocal statement of intent backed up by a route map to net zero and beyond. So on the 27th of June 2019, we agreed with cross-party consensus my motion to declare a climate emergency and adopted a 12-point plan which was prepared in consultation with fellow councillors, council officers and a range of stakeholders to enable us to be carbon neutral by 2025. Now, this is one of the most ambitious targets in the whole of Scotland, but the plan also includes commitments to protect the natural environment and to support communities to adapt to the realities of climate change and take the opportunity to grow a sustainable regional economy, green economy. We're well placed to be carbon neutral, a predominantly rural region with huge natural capital assets, low population, and the absence of heavy industry in the main. But in contrast, it's important to say that our small and isolated rural communities, which are already struggling to sustain themselves, face many challenges. An increasing older age population, a reducing population of young people, lack of affordable housing and employment opportunities, poverty, including fuel poverty, which is very prevalent here, and limited in many cases to no public transport, diminishing amenity and services. And add to this mix Brexit and recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic and the climate emergency, you can be forgiven for thinking it's a gloomy outlook. So 2020 has proven to be an infamous year, not just because of the pandemic, but also because of climate change. But when the pandemic has given us a glimpse of what's possible when we have the will to do it. We saw a dramatic decrease in vehicles on our roads and air travel ground to a near halt. Our outdoor environment was less polluted. Nature began to recover and wildlife began to reappear in our towns and villages. People started growing their own vegetables and bought local. We walked and cycled as part of our daily exercise, and we saw our communities respond and look out for one another in a manner which was nothing short of astonishing at a time when people were often cited as having scant regard for their environment or a sense of what it meant to be part of a community. In all the trauma and challenges experienced during the lockdown, it was the unanticipated positive consequence of the pandemic, the new normal as it's dubbed. However, as restrictions are now being lifted, we're in danger of returning to the old normal and not learning. I really hope that's not the case as we move forward. But what also made 2020 a significant year were the findings of a recently published report by the UK Met Office. 2020 was the third warmest, fifth wettest, and eighth sunniest year in record, and in no year ever have these criteria appeared on the same list of top 10. 2020 was one of the least snowy in record, which is of course evidence of milder winters. And it is anticipated that 2021 data, so for this year, will make even worse reading for the UK climate. Over the last 30 years, the UK has become 0.9 degrees warmer and 6% wetter. Interestingly though, records kept by the operators of the Galloway hydro scheme demonstrate that rainfall in the area has increased by around 30% since the 1930s. And while some experts believe greenhouse gas levels are already too high for a manageable future for humanity, and as we get to 1.5 degrees global warming, the UK will experience summer temperatures of up to 40 degrees C and even more frequent severe weather events. We only have to look to recent examples of severe weather events across the world, including most recently in Germany, to see the devastating consequences of global warming. So climate change is already here, and the warming of the planet is probably moving even faster than we'd even previously thought. And that has consequences for us all and for future generations. In the years ahead, society will have some huge decisions to make on how to respond and adapt to climate change. But in my experience, people can sometimes become overwhelmed by the enormity of climate change. And to be perfectly honest, I often feel that way myself. However, this doesn't mean that as individuals and communities that we shouldn't take action as part of a collective global response. Simple, straightforward things that we can do to make our local communities more sustainable and resilient, and in the way being taken forward by Climate Ready Ken project, for example, and I think Ted will refer to some of these things that we can do locally later on. So put simply, think globally, act locally, understand the consequences of failing to respond to global warming and how you as an individual and as part of a community can respond. So what is Dumfries and Galloway Council doing? In the first year after the Council's climate emergency declaration, we put in place a new climate change strategic framework necessary to change organisational culture to one that focused on our relationship with the environment and to enable us to be carbon neutral by 2025. Despite the many challenges faced during the pandemic, I've been hugely impressed by the drive and commitment of our council officers across departments such as transport, waste services, roads, housing, procurement and education, and the support given to them by fellow elected members. We're at a relatively early stage, however. I do expect that the pace of change will ramp up considerably over the next 12 months, and for the Council's annual budgetary decisions to be led by the response to climate change. In implementing our 12-point plan, we commissioned an emissions baseline inventory for council services that included agriculture, transport, industry, buildings and housing. And interestingly, CO2 emissions attributed to the council were only 0.7% of the region-wide total. We established an elected member cross-party working group, which I chair, and also an officer working group to oversee implementation of the 12-point plan, and created a new strategic priority encompassing our wide-ranging response to climate change. And since approval of the new strategic priority late last year, all council departments now require to produce departmental plans which align with that priority. The objective was to establish a whole council approach which embedded response to the climate emergency and to ensure accountability, both in terms of the officers responsible for taking this forward, but also, importantly, your elected members. Everyone in the council has a role to play, and no matter where you sit in the organisational structure, you have a role to play. Despite the pandemic and all the challenges that this has brought, the council, we've commenced work in a wide range of projects, such as rolling out curbside recycling, electrifying our vehicle fleet, expanding work on active travel networks and infrastructure, developing a home working policy for staff, plans for Lochermoss Eco-Deco. That infamous Eco-Deco plant is going to have a solar farm in the next coming year or two. Implementing the Scottish Government's 2.6 million funded home insulation grant scheme, ambitious borderland projects such as Chapelgross Renewables and Innovation Centre, Stranraer Sustainable Marina, and a regional natural capital inventory. Our education department is now in the process of implementing sustainability for learning in our nurseries and schools. And the value of education in schools with sustainability embedded throughout the curriculum is too great to quantify, but will prepare our young people for the challenges ahead and the opportunities of a transformative low-carbon employment sector. The 12-point plan doesn't just focus on carbon reductions, but also includes our commitment to protect the natural environment and biodiversity. So in the next few months, we'll begin work on a new forestry and woodland strategy and a biodiversity action plan, which will be carried out in consultation with communities, landowners and stakeholders. Natural carbon sinks, which we've already heard about from Nikki, such as forestry and peatland, are critical to being carbon neutral, and there is a rapidly growing ecological crisis which we need to address concurrently with reducing carbon emissions. And all of this work doesn't stop in 2025. This is about the long-term future of where and how we live. So working in partnership, we're very fortunate to have so many brilliant organisations in Dumfries and Galloway, either already supporting the response to the climate emergency or committing to do so. Familiar to all of us, of course, are the brilliant Galloway Glens Partnership, the Biosphere, which is in the process of being significantly expanded, and Climate Ready Ken. And the Council is actively engaged with a wide range of regional stakeholders, such as the National Farmers Union reps in Dumfries and Galloway, Forestry and Land, Dumfries and Galloway College, housing agencies, Swestrands, Sustrands, the Dumfries and Galloway Economic Leadership Group, and Community Planning Partnership member organisations. There are simply too many stakeholders to mention them all, but it's critical that they all share our commitment to tackle climate change. It's really important that we work on a more formal basis if we're to achieve our climate ambitions for the region, which is why we're now establishing a regional stakeholder network so that we can work collaboratively, pool resources and share best practice. This partnership approach is something that we're good at in Dumfries and Galloway, but in reality, we really don't have a choice to do otherwise. So importantly, what's happening in our local communities? Many people and communities have responded to the climate emergency, which brings me back to the commitment to support communities to adapt to the realities of climate change and taking action at a local level. In the last 18 months, we've seen a plethora of community-based organisations become established. For example, Auchencairn Climate Transition, Mackers and Cree Valley Climate Action, Wheels of Fleet here in Gatehouse, which is proving hugely successful in getting folk onto bikes, Eco Warrior Beach Cleans, and even Kirkcudbright Rotary Club, which has established an environment group and are engaged in tree planting and litter picks and beach cleans. Dumfries and Galloway Sustainable Food Partnership, and of course Fridays for Future, school pupils across the region who have been enormously influential on decision makers, and I include myself in that. And I was delighted in 2019 to attend one of these school strikes, which I have to say was facilitated by teachers and with their support. And the council also supports youth councillors and members of the Scottish Youth Parliament who have identified climate change as one of their top priorities. And they're carrying out a range of activities, including beach cleans and plans to provide environment packs for all young people in the region. All of these community organisations are contributing significantly to the region-wide drive to tackle climate change and develop sustainable communities, and wherever possible, we're providing support and encouragement. And although this is understandable, we've perhaps lost some of the community-based momentum for action that we perhaps had back in 2019. Back then, it felt as though the region was mobilising, and I really hope that communities can now become engaged and reinvigorated to take action locally as we emerge from the COVID pandemic. I'd like to speak briefly about the Council's plans for a citizens panel. So the Scottish Climate Assembly recently published its recommendations to the Scottish Government across a wide range of areas, such as resource management and reuse practices, planning decisions, building standards, low carbon food, 20-minute communities, public transport, and the need to balance environment with landowners and communities for sustainable land use, and much, much more. From the very outset, it was clear to me that in our regional response to the climate emergency, that we had to empower people living and working in Galloway, Dumfries and Galloway, by establishing a citizens panel which would be able to directly influence decisions made by the council and achieve meaningful outcomes based on lived experience and a just transition that doesn't leave people behind. I'm delighted to say that in the last few weeks, we've appointed an independent organisation to deliver our panels. And whilst I'm not able to go into too much detail at the moment, the panels will be focused on community with wide-ranging and inclusive representation and supported by subject experts. But most of all, I want to hear from people who hitherto haven't had a voice. We genuinely want to be meaningful and compelling outcomes and recommendations for action by the Council and our partners. So in conclusion, Scotland has demonstrated that we can transition from carbon to renewable energy sources. And although there is so much more that needs to be done, there are achievements that we can draw some confidence from. In 2020, 97.4% of electricity came from renewables, and onshore wind delivers 70% capacity. Beatrice offshore wind farm, which went online in 2019, provides electricity to power 450,000 homes, and Seagreen wind farm, which is currently under construction, will have the capacity to provide power for 3.1 million homes. So where there is a will by national governments, there is a way. However, they need to move further and faster and reconnect with what we described in 2019 as the climate emergency. Hopefully COP26 will provide that opportunity, because it does look as though we're probably in the last chance saloon on climate change. And as for here in Dumfries and Galloway, I feel strongly that we can contribute significantly to the national and worldwide effort to halt global warming. And the key to this will be working in partnership with our communities. We're blessed with natural capital, our wind, waters, forests, peatlands, coastline, and biodiversity. And importantly, we're blessed with our people. But we have some difficult decisions ahead on how we prioritise council services and pay for major projects at a time when the full effect of Brexit is still to materialise and the financial consequences of the pandemic begin to unravel. We need every village and town in the region to work towards creating sustainable communities. The reality is that the poorest and the most vulnerable in our communities are the most likely to suffer from the consequences of climate change, so we need to ensure that no one is left behind. And whilst the Council has undertaken to take the lead in our region, the answer sits and exists within our communities. Should remind you, however, that the next council election will be next May, and my sincere hope is that the new political administration of whatever colour will reaffirm its commitment to continue with urgency the work that we've embarked on to be a carbon neutral region, protect our natural environment and support communities to adapt to climate change. This isn't your usual quick fix, job and finish approach. This is about our future. We all need to think globally and act locally. To do otherwise is no longer an option for us. I hope that I've given you an insight into the journey the Council, our communities and indeed our partners are embarking on. I'll be happy to take any questions, but in addition, if you're looking for any more information on anything that I've covered tonight, your Climate Emergency Project Officer, Sarah Farrell, will be delighted to assist you. And I think Helen is going to post her contact details later. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Diggy. Fantastic. Really interesting. As you say, it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour because there's so much to cover, but really interesting to hear about the citizens panel. That's going to be very exciting, and the regional stakeholder network. Like you say, it's all about the partnership working, isn't it? But Ted, I think, has got a great question here, because this is where the difficult stuff comes in, isn't it? Will the council start to require developers to address climate change in all new planning and other applications as a #1 priority? You know, that's when it starts to bite, is when it becomes the top criterion for application. So is there anything you can tell us about that?
Well, there's sort of two sort of elements to that question. So Scottish Government sets Scottish planning policy. So in terms of the driving force for addressing the construction of developments or the damage that they might create, the Scottish Government has a very important role to play in that regard. And Dumfries and Galloway Council, some people may have heard reference before to the local development plan, LDP, and the new development plan is already underway in terms of its production, albeit it'll be a couple of years before that actually emerges from the planning department. But the important thing is that if anyone listens into our planning committee meetings, climate change and environmental impact is coming up time and time again. And the climate emergency declaration that we made as a council is a material consideration, using the language that planning officers like to use. So it's a work in progress, but I feel strongly that we as a council need to do everything we can to ensure that any developments that we support or approve are very much in line with our climate emergency commitments, our strategic priority, and commit to, as soon as new policy emerges from the Scottish Government, that it is implemented as soon as is possible. And it was interesting, having read the recommendations from the Scottish Climate Assembly, so that was the assembly of 100 people established by the Scottish Government. Planning was a theme in that regard. And one of the recommendations makes specific recommendations in relation to all new construction of homes being up to or beyond the Passive House standards. And certainly with our local housing agencies that we have, and there are several in Dumfries and Galloway, many of them already only plan to construct passive houses. Lower Burn and DGHP being two good examples of that. So there is a lot of movement, but we're not fully there yet. But it's certainly something that's very much on our radar.
I think those are the things that are really going to complement the sort of gist of this initiative, which is all about the individual actions. It's so good then when you see someone like Lawburn or DGHP make a statement like that all our houses will be passive standard from now on. That, you know, it just affirms everybody, doesn't it, and takes the whole thing forward.
It does. It does.
So that's really good. MWall, offshore, I don't know if this is a bit tongue-in-cheek or whether it's a genuine question. Offshore and onshore wind farms, how much more do we need to supply Scotland? I don't know if you want to talk to that. I guess it comes back to the think globally, act locally thing, doesn't it? If we can export clean energy, then so much the better. I think we're just setting an interconnector, aren't we, to Norway? Do you send electricity to them and then they can pump up their hydro at night time?
Well, I mean, one of the things that Scotland is blessed with is wind, whether that be offshore or onshore. And I guess that the question sort of comes from a frustration that people feel that we've got more than our fair share of wind farms in our region, and I've got a lot of sympathy for that. But I think you know, wind farms certainly onshore need to be in the right place. There need to be as many mitigations as at all possible. But the debate around wind farms, I think, is something that we need to grasp that debate, and you know, and talk it through, because renewable energy through wind is going to be very, very important to our national ambitions to be carbon neutral.
Yeah, no. Oh, and they've clarified that they're all in favour of exporting it. So that's interesting. Jenna there, who I might just take the opportunity to introduce. Actually, Jenna, if you want to give us a wave. Jenna's the community engagement and educational lead for the Biosphere, Galloway and Southern Ayrshire Biosphere, one of our partners in this project. And we're going to come back to Jenna a bit later on. But yeah, Jenna's just saying there. Thanks so much, Dougie. That was really, really interesting. So I don't know if there are any other questions. It was a very comprehensive talk, Dougie. Thank you very much. If not, just trying to think. Yes, the learning for sustainability I picked up on that we're working. That's really come up, and I know that, and we're doing some partnership work with them as well. So it just all reinforces the story, doesn't it? So.
It does, and it's been something that I've felt strongly about from the very outset, to have our education department on board. Not just about insulating drafty old schools, it's about the future of our young people, but also the influence that they can have, not only on their parents, but also their grandparents. And you know, I'm really pleased by the approach that our education department has taken. I think we'll get something in the region of 20 to 30 eco schools in Dumfries and Galloway. I would just absolutely love it if all our schools were eco schools, or a version of that, because there is so much good work can be done in that particular environment. Yeah,
absolutely. And yeah. Jenna's pointing out, of course, the Biosphere is part of the Learning for Sustainability partnership. Yeah, it's a really good partnership, very wide-ranging. And then, yeah, Leslie, you're exactly right. Individual and cultural changes is where we've got the challenges. And that's, I wonder if that circles back in my mind to these things about seeing big initiatives like Lawburn stating that they're only going to build houses with passive homes. That starts to change the culture of a region, you know, and all these add up, and you think, you know, this is happening and we've got to be part of it. So
yeah, I think,
fingers crossed. Yeah, go on.
When we declared a climate emergency, we felt quite lonely, because there was a sort of a lack of sort of positive response from other organisations in the initial stages. But suddenly it really has taken off, and we've got organisations clamouring to be involved in this regional network. So I think that's really, really encouraging, because we can't do it on our own. We need everybody to put their wheel to the shoulder to the wheel.
Fabulous. All right, well, thank you so much, Dougie. Brilliant to hear from you. Thanks very much for coming on.
Thank
We
you very
appreciate
much.
it. I'm going to hand over now to Ted. Teddy's going to share his screen, I think, and he's going to talk us through some sort of more personal reflections on the theme, which I think is going to be fascinating as well.
Yes, and you can hear me. Okay, well, thanks very much for inviting me along, and thanks to both speakers. I was really glad I even checked that we were recording this, because I think I'm going to need to listen to Dougie's about 5 times before I pick up half the information that was in there. So much there. So thanks very much. My role is to kind of try and draw together really some of what we've learnt in the last 4 sessions, and base that around my own experiences. And I think, so I'm going to start off with the why, and this was posed to me by Helen and asking me could you give a bit of an outline of why you do what you do? And I think that as I was thinking about that, I've got 2 passions probably in my life, one of which is the environment and the other is photography. And as I was thinking about this, I came to the very definite conclusion that I am actually an eco-nerd. That doesn't mean to say I'm a scientist or an academic at all, very much not the case, but my passion has been throughout my life in these 2 areas. And just take you back into my history a little bit. Started off as, actually before this, I was an accountant, I have to say. I lasted 2 months as an accountant in London before I realised that really wasn't for me. It kind of typifies me, having been put through college by my parents, ended up as an accountancy firm, and then told them after 2 months that actually I was giving that up to go and work behind the counter of a photographer. So it really kind of, that started me off in the photography world. And in 1990, I guess that this was my first big environmental effort, I suppose. And in Covent Garden, I did a 24-hour juggle for Greenpeace. And in the same year, really, this is when it really hit me, the significance of the climate emergency. I think we called it global warming then, which I think everybody got quite cozy with. It was like, oh, I quite fancy some of that. They didn't really, and then it changed to climate change, and everybody was kind of still a bit, oh, that's all right. And now we're starting to hear that terminology change to climate breakdown and climate emergency. And I wish 30 years ago, when I started as a volunteer, that was the language that was being talked about, because I think the message to most people was not clear. So I worked I moved up to Scotland in '96 to start a renewable energy company. It was 2 guys in a bedroom in Glasgow, a spare bedroom in Glasgow. We had 2 other people that were working for us. Pretty much, if you wanted a job with us, you had to work for half wages for the first 6 months to prove that you were an environmentalist. It was, we didn't have contracts or anything like that back in those days. And Natural Power, we went on to sell it to, sold the company, moved down to Dumfries and Galloway to build an eco office, which if you go up to Forest Estate, just north of Dalry, you'll see our office there, the greenhouse. And the idea was both to develop a renewables company and business. We were 10 people at that point, but also we had already realized that there was significant rural depopulation in the local area. And so we were very keen to see if we could become part of that community and help stem the flow. And we also wanted to put a bit of 2 fingers up to London and prove that you could run a successful business without being in London or one of the big commercial centres of the world. I then left, jumping on a couple of points here, 2004 to go back to photography, my second love, which I did for the next, well, I've done ever since actually. In 2009 was when I've been working in the field of renewables and thinking I was super keen on renewables. Actually realized in my life I wasn't really talking the talk in what I was doing. And if I was going to be an exemplar and talk about this subject, then I should actually be doing it myself, and understanding and making mistakes. I fully realized making a lot of mistakes along the way, both in business and in my own life, doing environmental changes. So we built an eco house and looked at rewilding we bought 11 acres, rewilding that. We're 12 years down the line, and if you drive that high road with four miles out of Galloway on the high road to Carsfen, if you actually look at we put a double fence around our property to keep it separate from the sheep grazing, which had been next door. And 12 years on, we were talking about trees earlier. It is amazing. Some of the trees are up to 20 meters tall now. Half of it we've replanted ourselves with about 3,000 trees, but half of it is actually regenerating amazingly from, be it the seed bank or what the birds are bringing in and just dropping, or animals are bringing in, and the biodiversity has changed massively. I then went back to natural power, this time as managing director. I left at 24 people. I went back, we were over 200 people, already a multinational, and worked as MD till 2016. I think we were 350 when we left. And I think the only reason I mention the numbers is just this huge change in this one particular industry, which is only a small part of addressing the issue. And we've kind of ridden the wave of that. And it was really probably one of the main areas where I think the successes have truly been seen over the last 30 years. And then the last couple, I was still always separating business, photography and environment. And so in 2016, I stepped aside from commercial as such, although I've never seen myself as a businessman. I've always seen myself as an environmentalist. And now I've very much brought together my photography and my environmental criteria, and everything I do now in my photography is with respect to hopefully raising awareness, activism, concept projects addressing subjects around climate change, and also as part of that, the way we lead our lives, and I'll come on to that more, but the lifestyle thing, run workshops as photographers all over to Iceland, Faroes, all over Europe. We decided to stop flying and refocus our business completely in 2018, so we don't fly anymore. Sorry, I'm just going to look if I can turn off my video. Helen, I've got low bandwidth showing stop video. Is that better? So yes, we stopped flying in 2018, and unless in emergencies, if there's a family emergency or something like that, then that required us to do something, then of course we would do it. We do still live in 21st century. And finally, 2020, I finally got around to buying e-bikes, which have been amazing. We probably do half the number of trips in the car now. It might take twice as long to get somewhere, but we just build that into our lifestyle, and it's very easy and much easier than we thought. Okay, so the big why. I'm just very quickly, I'm already over time, so I'll rattle through it a little bit. We talk about why are we doing this, and every time I worry and question myself on why we're doing this, I bring this grass up. It's by NASA. This goes back 400,000 years, and through the last 30 years of being an environmentalist, I've had naysayers saying climate variance has always happened. It's a circular thing, and we're in the middle of a hot cycle. And 20 years ago, we were talking about a new ice age coming. Well, they're right. There has been cycles. We go back in this graph 400,000 years up to the present day, and you see those cycles there, the hot elements and the cold elements. But if you go to year naught, right on the right hand side there, that's 1950. And then you look up from that naught to the line and you see the change that has happened since 1950. And that for me is why probably I've been doing what I've been doing, and hopefully increasingly everybody is starting to see. And now let's just go back to 1990. This is when I started as a volunteer. In 1990, we already knew. I love the think global, act local. I think that was a Friends of the Earth phrase from the 1980s. And it's disappeared from use, and it's fantastic that it's been used again. We knew the problems back then. We knew everything. In 1990 was when governments across the world put the baseline of CO2 for their country together, and from that allocated targets for the reduction that was required in CO2 emissions to address climate change. That was in 1990. Since then, half the gases contributing to climate change have been emitted into the atmosphere. So I was 22-ish, 24 in 1990. In 30 years, since I've been working in this field, half the gases that contribute to climate change. It is our generation that has caused this problem. We can't blame history. We can't blame else. It's us. It's our generation, and unbelievably in the last 30 years, which is phenomenal for me. And I then was so shocked at that. I thought, well, we must be getting better. 2021, it's gonna rise again by another 5%. And 2023, I saw in the papers this year, it's going to be up again, and they think is probably going to be the highest level ever. So when I asked, why do I do it? This is my answer. This is something, and someone asked about, it was an interesting one, how has Scotland done its bit for wind energy when we're producing all the electricity that we need as a Scottish nation? And the question I asked a friend in Norway the other day, who said exactly the same thing with respect to Norway, a big backlash on onshore wind. And I said to him, does in asking that question, does the person also recognize the contribution that Norway has had to climate change by the oil extraction that it's done and exported to other countries? So I think that it's a very, very complex. I understand the issues. I'm not pro onshore wind, and insofar as it should be blanket coverage of onshore wind, it should be appropriate development, whatever that development is, in the right place. But we have to recognize the consequences with respect to the #1 emergency that we have. Going back, Doogie address this, so I'm not going to spend much on it, but we can do brilliant things. We can do amazing things. And just in our area, 1995, not one wind farm or solar farm in Scotland, not one. The first one was Hagshaw Hill. I kind of know it because I actually helped develop and build it. 100% of Scotland's electricity now comes from renewables. That is a magnificent change in potential, and a government that is willing to commit to do more. We've got ScotWind and the offshore coming up as we speak, and we have commitments or we've now closed all the coal-fired power stations. Fantastic things. Renewables and low energy industries in the last 30 years are employing over 200,000 people. and contributing £43 billion to the UK economy. This is just the start, because the emergency is only just, or addressing the emergency is only just starting. And another very important figure is that actually 75% of people now are concerned about climate breakdown. And that might seem crazy, but I promise you, most people when I started in the industry didn't even know where their electricity came from. And one of the reasons I got involved in renewables was because I saw that if nothing else, it would require people to question themselves about where their electricity and energy came from and make choices. Would I rather have fossil fuels, nuclear power, or renewables, and why? So what can I do? What have I done, and how have I done it? Well, and this is the question that I always ask myself now, and that is, just remember that nothing comes for free. When I walk into a shop, when I buy something, when I get on a plane, nothing comes for free. I put this picture up. This is the Carrara marble quarries in, or a fraction of the Carrara marble quarries in Italy, in Tuscany, where to deliver that lovely kitchen marble worktop, this is what happens at a local scale to deliver that lovely marble workshop to people. Michelangelo's David came from this quarry. It's the best marble in the world. There's many quarries like this, but it just does quite nicely show the point. So what have I done? First of all, I'll take energy options. It's a third of the problem. So let's look at that. And as I go through the next stage, that number will tell you how important, what the scale of impact a single measure can have. So changing your energy source to a renewable energy tariff is one of the biggest things. It's the fourth biggest thing that you can do to help address electricity. Now, renewable energy tariffs are literally no more expensive than the normal ones. It takes about 15 minutes to make the change. So that's a massive one that I would highly recommend to anybody. You can get a grant to install a heat pump. It costs you nothing. You can get a loan. You have to pay up front, but the Energy Saving Trust, who spoke last time round, will give you a grant for pretty much the full price of it. So it's something you can do very cheaply. I've also done solar, thermal and wind, but that's actually, there's no government grants at the minute, or no significant ones to help you on that journey. Electric vehicles, green transport. Number two best thing you could do would be to give up a car. So if you had a bike and you walked and used public transport, that would be the second biggest saving that you could make. I haven't done it. It's extremely difficult, especially in rural communities. An electric vehicle is number 5 on the list of good things you can do. I'm hoping to get one soon. I think that they're coming of age, and it's a huge area of potential for us. You can get, if you're on a low income, you can get significant grants to help insulate your house. And again, I'll point you back to the EST. That's number 4 again. All of this is related to energy in the home. Number 3 on the list is to give up flying. Don't fly. Now, for most people, that is not acceptable, but maybe you could try doing one less flight if you're a multiple flyer a year. Once you start doing these things, it's absolutely amazing. It becomes quite a challenge and quite exciting. And trust me, I'm going to be giving a talk next week actually on how our photography has gone from global landscape photography to taking pictures from a single location. And I find it every bit as exciting exploring local venues. And I think that's one thing that COVID has done for us, is making us look at what's closer to home and recognizing the beauty of what's all around. The next thing that I do in my life is I always ask myself when I'm trying to buy something, do I need the item or do I just want it? do I need an extra pair of jeans, or is it just something I want because the fashion has said it's got to have a rip on the left knee, not the right knee this year? For this, I now always try and ask myself, because a huge part of addressing the issue is reducing consumption. And of reducing consumption, that significantly the biggest is eating less meat and less fish. It's not saying, no one is ever saying you should give up. And I think a lot of people would find that unacceptable. But if you can actually eat less meat and less fish, it makes a significant difference. An interesting fact here is that to make one beef burger requires 660 gallons of water in that production cycle for the big agro industries. So it really does show you, and that's just part of the requirements for all the crops that need to be grown to feed them, etc., etc. It's hugely energy consumption, as well as other elements. I'm not going to go through all of these, but it's interesting to see, because for the last 30 years, we've pretty much been told, as long as you recycle and keep on buying, everything will be fine. Number 9 on the list, way down the list, is recycling. Now, I'm not saying don't recycle. All I'm saying is that the priorities in our mindsets have to completely change away from LED lights at number 11 and recycling, not stopping doing them, but some of these higher items up on the list, we've really got to start getting our heads around. Interesting, before the earlier talk, I'd say I'd already put grow an acorn and plant it out. Magic thing to do. If you're anywhere near pensionable wage, or even have money in a pension, the biggest thing that you can do is have a voice change. If you change your pension fund to a renewables, or that meets the sustainable development goals of the United Nations, all the funding of the finance companies that goes into, that comes from pension funds, that will change immediately, because if they see there's no value to them for your pension, to invest in fossil fuels and dirty industries, they'll stop doing it overnight. So you can have a voice of change in that. Rewilding an area of your garden, write to your MP. I don't want to get political here, but MPs, if they think that the local people have a big enough voice on an issue, they will take it up and support you in that regard. And volunteer, it was already mentioned. It's a massive way of contributing, is volunteering. Helen, I'm going over now. Am I okay for another probably 3 minutes? Yeah, okay. I'll finish. And the other thing you can do, it's not perfect. No one says it's perfect, but we have to bring about change, and offsetting, planting those trees, helping to protect that peat, being a volunteer, going out and doing offsetting if you do have to make that plane journey, etc. Then offsetting certainly has a lot to play as well. Okay, so what's the biggest thing that you can do? I'm going to get, this is one I didn't have this slide in before, so this hasn't passed muster as such. So this is kind of controversial, maybe, hope not. 20 times the savings of any other measure that I've talked about so far. Have a guess. Anybody got any ideas? 20 times the savings of any other measure, not flying, not energy, changing to renewables. This is 20 times better. Okay, we'll give you a clue. In 1812, there was 1 billion of these. In 1912, there was 1.5 billion of these. In 2020, there's around 7.7 billion of these. And it's estimated there'll be 10 billion of them by 2100. And that is us. And herein lies the nub. And so, while you get all depressed and decide that you need cheering up after you leave this, the best thing that you can do is use a condom. Sorry about that. I had to put it in there. But on a seriously slightly more important note, because we have a stable population, relatively stable compared to a lot of other countries. But here's another interesting fact to bear in mind when you think, well, this is someone else's problem because the bigger families are in developing countries. Well, the top 10 richest countries in the world, or richest peoples of the world, produce 50% of that carbon that's causing the problem. So there cannot be any finger pointing at populations where they have large populations and growing populations, when actually it is the developed world that is causing significantly most of the problem. But I'm going to end on a happy note. While you're doing all this stuff, you can actually have fun doing it as well. This was an activism day. We went out, we were trying to save the peat, basically. And I hear that not long after we did this action and a lot of other actions and voices coming in, that there are new guidelines due to come out that have changed the requirements on forestry companies in planting in transitional peat zones, so it becomes more difficult for them to do so. This was just a piece of fun. I think that a picture tells 1,000 words, and you should not be able to go bog snorkeling in a peat bog because there is no water. It's all under the ground. This is because it's been drained for the plantation forestry behind. And that was the message we were trying to get across. But we had a fantastic day. We laughed all day, and hopefully it brought about not only a smile on people's faces, but also raised an important issue. I'm going to leave it there. Helen, pass it back to you. Sorry for going over time.
Oh, fabulous. Thank you for that, Ted. Amazing. That last slide is not authorised, and I'm going to have to refer you to the chair of our scheme. So I'm sorry about that. The brilliant run through of the difference that we can all make. I think that's what we've been discussing, isn't it? All for these 4 events is the difference that we can make, and it's great to actually hear one person's story that they're really committed to it and really actively changed their lifestyle, and it hasn't been the end of the world, and maybe it's contributing to averting the end of the world. So thanks for that. I am really conscious of the time. I know we said we'd be done by 9. I've got a few slides, but I do want to give people time if you've got any questions for Ted while he's here. Yeah, do we think we will get to a one-child rule? Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, go on, Ted, you got a view on that?
No, I'm as I say, I'm not a specialist in any of these areas, and it's not my role to address that problem. I can talk a little bit about renewables, but population's a very, very sensitive subject. I don't think it's even on the agenda. It's a bit like tuna fishing and is it dolphin friendly or not? You know, it's a very difficult area. It's not my area of specialism, but what I do understand is that we are currently using the Earth's resources at 150% of what it's capable of, and if we keep on increasing the population, it makes the problem even worse.
Yeah, right enough. Okay, well, I've not got anything else. Leslie, you made a comment there about community organisations, which I am just going to touch on just now. So, I mean, obviously, we said we've been done by 9. Obviously, you can all leave at any time that you would like to, but I'm just going to take the chance to give a quick update for how the people who signed up through Geeky to be part of Team Galloway got on. So I'm just going to share my screen. Right, how's that looking? Is that looking good, Jenna? Yeah, great. So we've had 38 people sign up since May, the first event of these in May, and those of you who are conversant with Galloway will know that the higher the score, the better. So it's not like your carbon footprint where you're trying to go low. And over 500 is deemed to be very good. 1,000 is planet saver. An average might be about 300 or something. So as a team, we've done very, very well. I did look into it a bit, and because people have joined throughout the period, the actual score goes, it's noticeable that it goes down as people implement their steps, and then it goes up as somebody joins with a bigger score, and then it goes down again as they implement their changes. So there's not been a huge net change over the 4 months, but that's because we've had people joining, and everybody's at different places on their journey. But what you can see here is that we've saved 2.5 tons of carbon over the 4 months with the steps that we've taken between us, those 38 people. And the other nice thing about Geeky is that it also monitors the water that you saved, the land use, and single-use plastic. So, you know, I think that does show that people can make a difference. If I break that down a little bit further, the UK average footprint is here, and Team Galloway is here. The target is here. I'm here, and I'm going to come on to that later. I'm not very happy about it, but the point is to be informed so that you can change your behaviour. But yeah, Team Galloway running well ahead of the UK average, and well on track to get down to the target of a sustainable level that this planet can support. Geeky breaks it down for you, and you can see here, I mean, it's no coincidence these have been the topics of our sessions: the home, food. We didn't do a specific one on transport just because living rurally, it's so hard to do something about transport. It's all well and good saying swap your car ride for a walk to work if you're not, you know, 12 miles away to the nearest town. So because we've always focused on individual actions, we haven't focused too much on transport. But these are some of the big wins that people have been doing. And when I looked into the stats behind it, you can see that they really are making a difference. They've swapped to organic cotton for their clothes. Swapping to a green energy provider, so easy, makes such a big difference. Taking shorter showers, buying second-hand clothes, that may have been McNabb, and eliminating food waste. To those of you who are here for our first one with Anna, and then also Abby, and the second one, you know, if it, you know, you grow it and you ship it and you transport it and you bring it home and then you chuck it in the bin. So planning out and eliminating food waste has really made a difference. Oh, I've not updated my slide. But if everybody lived like Team Galloway, it would still be only just under 9 years until the global carbon budget runs out, i.e. until we could no longer limit the warming to 1.5 degrees. So although we're doing well and we're doing better than average, the challenge is real, you know, and this is the reality that Geeky helps to keep front and central with you. So we've got to keep going. In Geeky, you can toggle between what you've done and what you're trying to do. And if you remember that 2.5 ton amount of what we've actually achieved so far, what people have committed to do is remove 45 tons of carbon between the 38 members. So if every one of us who's signed up to Team Galloway, and anybody else who's on and would like to do it just either as individuals or to join in, you know, this is starting to be a really significant reduction. That's more than a ton per person. And, you know, there's the cut a ton in 21 slogan. You know, if we all set off on that track, we would beat that target by far. So I wanted to highlight, just in the spirit of review of going back, some of the main things that you could consider. And again, I've tried to make them relevant to where we live here in Galloway. Don't idle your car. It's so easy to do. And it really does. It makes a decent impact, you know, just sitting there with the engine running while you pop into the shop or whatever. Just stop doing it, I would say. Lift share, maybe an option soon. Things keep improving with COVID, so don't forget that that's what we used to do and what we can do again. So and it might be a bit inconvenient, but you know, if you could halve your car usage by sharing it with someone else, then absolutely brilliant. And then, you know, switch to an electric car. I know that's easy to say and hard to do. They're expensive. We've not got the infrastructure yet, but if you can countenance it, the more people who do it, the quicker we'll get there. Food, remembering back to Abby's excellent presentation 2 months ago, buy sustainably sourced fish if you can, buy fair trade coffee, tea, chocolates. That's the same theme. It's about thinking about where your stuff comes from. Yeah, being informed and making the choices that work for you, not just going blindly ahead. Have vegetarian lunches every day for a week. I quite like that because that seemed very doable, but again, it's a good impact. You know, these things all add up. And in the home, we had the Home Energy Trust last month giving us some top tips there. I missed that one, but I gather it was excellent. Again, it's a big deal, but you know, once you've done it, you've done it. Install solar panels on your roof. Try a zero waste shop. That's easier done at your local shops, I will say, than at the supermarkets. So, you know, plan it out. It's a good feeling when you manage that one. And ditch the tumble dryer. Now, I know that's easy to say on a day like this, and it's very hard to do in October and December. But again, if you've got it at the front of your mind, even if you just minimize it, it all helps. So step for me, you know, my personal reflect, when I look at my personal breakdown within Geeky, which is what it allows you to do, it's become clear that, you know, I don't live an outrageous lifestyle, but I need to ask my pension company. I need to swap my pension to a sustainable one, which I'm going to do. I've got a meeting with them on the 25th. So I'm excited about that. I would not have crossed my mind until this initiative. So happy about that. And change my oil boiler, which seems insurmountable, but it's got to be done. You know, I can't swap it out for another fossil fuel boiler. So I'm planning that in for when it comes due in 3 or 4 years' time. And I think this was my nearly last one. I said for Team Galloway that we had the 45,000 or the 45 tons of carbon that we could save if everybody did all the things they committed to do. So I don't know if any of these sound familiar to anybody who's listening, but these are some of the steps that people signed up, said they would do. So if this sounds familiar, then just to kind of remind you to maybe have a look at it again. People said they would join a car share scheme. They said they would invest to protect an acre of rainforest. 3 people said they were going to install solar panels on their roof, which is awesome. A few people said that they would, they would swap to a plant-based diet or limit the amount of animal products. And similarly, people were committing to either go car-free or swap to an electric car. So if one of those was your commitments, if it rings a bell, then brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. And if you were enthused by Geeky at the beginning, then go back to it, because there really is no time like the present. We've got to get this stuff started. And then the last thing I just wanted to say very quickly was next steps. This is the last of this initiative. We set up this initiative. We started planning it in the spring, actually. It's been led by the Galloway Glens. I honestly do recognise most of the names on the distribution list, but the Galloway Glens is a 5-year suite of projects, all funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. And we cover the Glen Kents and Castle Douglas and Kirkcudbright. And all of our projects are aimed at connecting people with their heritage, but also supporting modern sustainable communities. And that's what this was in pursuit of, was really, I think we do understand our communities, and it's really about trying to inform, learn with you, with all our fantastic speakers, and get informed so we can take the next steps. We've had some fantastic partners in this. The Crichton Carbon Centre, Caris has been fabulous, thank you Caris. Dumfries and Galloway Council, Sarah's not been able to join us at any of the evenings, but Sarah Farrell is the council's climate change champion. Doogie mentioned her. She's been a fantastic partner in this, and Dumfries and Galloway Council are right behind this. And the Biosphere, Galloway and Southern Ayrshire UNESCO Biosphere. Jenna's here, and I'm just going to hand over to her in a little minute, but obviously they're a much bigger area than us, so it's exciting to see what the possibilities for the future are there. Geeky have been a fantastic partner supporting us through this, and their tool is very good. And of course, our National Heritage Lottery funding is really useful for everything like this. So that's why we came up with Galloway Footsteps, and our 4 online events are finished now. But when the partnership was discussing it, we thought we don't really feel like we want to leave it here. I'm very aware that Galloway Glens is 5 years. We do come to an end. We need to see these things embedded in communities rather than us running them, so that things don't fall off a cliff edge. But I'd like to propose, if people are up for it, and I'll send an email, that we have a Team Galloway coffee morning, possibly even in person, to discuss what people want to do. And this comes back to your point, Leslie, about what are the gaps in community provision. There are little initiatives starting to pop back up all over the place, and as Diggy said, they were going great guns in 2019, and some of them have got really knocked sideways by COVID. So this is not to start a new group, but to discuss what the options are for people who want to take it forward, and to meet like-minded people and get together, which would be fantastic. So I'll send out more details about that. Dougie referenced the Citizens Panel, the Dumfries and Galloway Council Citizens Panel. So this is to put up Sarah Farrell's contact details, sarah.farrell@dumgal.gov.uk. as he said, they're not in a position yet, I don't think, to really understand what the application process is going to be, but I know they are committed to getting new and different voices on it. So, you know, if you don't feel yourself to be an expert on this, don't let that stop you. You know, apply, find out more about it, and have your voice heard. I would say. Oh, Richard's just said, how about Team Galloway coffee evening for those that are at work during the day? Yes, very good idea. I might do a Google poll. And then lastly, rather than read this out myself, I might just hand over to Jenna, who should now be able to unmute herself. Jenna is our well, you can introduce yourself, Jenna. You've actually sharing my screen.
You've said it all. You've said it all. In the sentence there, yeah. So the Galloway and Southern Ayrshire Biosphere would very much like to borrow the concept of the Galloway Footsteps and roll it out so that as many people, as many communities across the whole biosphere can get the opportunity to get the information. And that's the key thing, is getting the information in the first place. And I think that the speakers and contributors that you've had have been excellent, and then get the opportunity then to reflect and take firm actions themselves. Because I think, as Doogie was saying, or was it Ted who was saying, so many more people are now not just aware of the climate emergency, but really wanting to take action. So it's important to empower the people and give them that the skills, then the actions that they can take, so that they can contribute really to what is everybody's problem, really, isn't it? And the time is now. It's now. So yeah, so we're very excited. It may no longer be Galloway Footsteps because it will be in Ayrshire, some of it, but we'll worry about that when we cross that bridge.
It's great to hear that, you know, it's absolutely exactly what the Galloway Glens likes to do, is to pilot something, have a go at it, hopefully be useful in its own right, and then, yeah, spin it out into the wider community. Absolutely brilliant. So thank you, Jenna. That's fantastic. So I think it only remains to me, I'm just checking on the questions. Oh yeah, Jenna's pointed out that New Galloway shop is an excellent place to get refills. I have to declare a conflict of interest there, but I would agree that yes, it's an excellent place to get refills. So, but other community shops and local shops do exist who are also excellent for that sort of thing, and you know, fundamentally better than Tesco at it. So yeah, and I'll say again, Harris & Co on Castle Douglas High Street do refills of wine, so that's always good to know. So I'm just going to say a big thank you to Nikki Hume from the Borders Forest Trust. I think you're still there, Nikki, although your camera's off. Thank you so much. That was fascinating about the trees. Doogie Campbell, quick rundown there. Down Precinct Galloway Council Climate Champion. Really good to hear from the inside. And Ted, thank you so much. Really, really interesting. And I should say, people probably worked out for themselves, but all of the photos behind Ted's slides, obviously he took himself. So that's why they were quite so stunning. So thank you all very much. It's been a fascinating 4 months for me. Really, really good. Really enjoyed it. I'm happy to keep Team Galloway going. I'm looking forward to meeting some of the faces in person, hopefully at morning or evening. And yeah, as ever, keep up to date on Galloway Glens Facebook, website, newsletter. And to keep up to touch with what else we're planning for the next 2 years. I'm going to let people just disappear because I hate ending these meetings with a bang. So I'll say thank you very much. Let people hang up, and hope to see you at another event later on.